Clinical trials are essential to advance cancer treatment, yet some people hesitate to participate or even inquire about clinical trials because they fear they'll be used as a guinea pig or that a placebo means no treatment at all. Let's find out the real story behind clinical trials and why you might want to consider one as a treatment option.
So what I tell patients that the obligation that they have is not to others. The obligation they have is to themselves. I think the number one thing that patients react to, and I'm going to just speak from my practice, when you offer a patient clinical trial and the patient says, well, what is that is, and we'll talk about this as a research study and so on, and he says, well, I'm going to be a guinea pig.
The percentage of patients that participate in clinical trials nationally is about 3% for adult patients. In cancer centers like ours, the percentages are closer to 15 or 20%, while much better, still not as many as patients who could actually benefit from these trials. Interestingly, the percent of pediatric children who have gone on clinical trials for cancer is much higher. And that's because most of children with cancer are treated in large cancer centers like ours. So in children, over half of children with cancer go on to a clinical trial in major centers like ours. Interestingly, the progress against childhood cancers has actually been much more dramatic and rapid than the progress in treatment of adult cancers. At least one of the reasons for this is that so many higher percentage of children go on clinical trials than adults.
So clinical trials are research studies that are scientifically designed and controlled, intending to ask a critical question that's relevant to cancer. In general, trials can be relating to therapy, so testing a new treatment such as medication, systemic therapy. It could involve radiation, it could involve surgery, or it could be asking a question about detection of cancer, prevention of cancer, quality of life of patients, or how to improve outcome for patients.
Patients on clinical trials actually get the very best care and the very latest care. Some clinical trials, like the kind that we call phase 3 clinical trials, actually compare the very best treatment to a new treatment.
Clinical trials are critical for us, not just in oncology but in medicine, to improve outcome for patients. If we were to find a cure for a deadly disease, that doesn't happen because we wish it to happen. It happens because we have science that would lead us to believe that a specific intervention is potentially of impact against the cancer. We have to test it in patients. You cannot replace animals or any other setting for patients.
One misconception is that patients with cancer may be given a phony drug or placebo as one of the arms of a clinical trial. We very, very rarely would have a treatment like that. As a matter of fact, I personally don't think it's ethical for a patient with advanced cancer to be taking a placebo.
I would point out that we do not do experimentations in the context of treatments that are curative. Okay, so if we know something is going to be cured with a specific treatment, generally speaking, if there's going to be any testing done, is to see how can we minimize the burden of the treatment, for example.
Phase 3 clinical trials are the ones that are the most advanced. Those are clinical trials in which it's already been established that a new treatment looks promising. We then take that new treatment and compare it to the very best treatment that's already available. Those are what's also called randomized trials, which means when you enter a trial like this, a computer will determine whether you get the best standard treatment or the new treatment that we hope will be better. And that's what's called a randomized clinical trial. A phase 2 clinical trial are for new approaches in which we already know the safety of those new medicines or new approaches. And the purpose is to see whether they actually work. So they're very new treatments, but we already know what to expect in terms of side effects. The earliest phase clinical trial is called a phase 1 clinical trial. And those are trials in which new medicines that have been tested in animals that look very promising but have not been given to actual patients are given to patients for the first time. Interestingly, when I first got into clinical research 30 years ago, patients in phase 1 clinical trials seldom benefited directly from that, although others obviously benefited when they moved to phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. The reason for that was that in my area, I'm a medical oncologist, all of the phase 1 clinical trials were kinds of new chemotherapies. And the chance of a new chemotherapy helping if you already have been through 4 or 5 established chemotherapies was really very small. All that has dramatically changed now. Our phase 1 clinical trials are largely what we call targeted therapies, that are new drugs that are developed against specific genes that are gone wrong in cancers. And what is really exciting now is that on some of these phase 1 clinical trials, when you hit the right drug for the right genetic abnormality, the results are actually dramatic. So we're actually seeing patients on phase 1 clinical trials get tremendous benefit. An example of that is a gene called ALK, ALK, that has been found to be mutated in about 5% of patients with lung cancer. Now, it's only 5%, but if you take patients that you analyze and they have this ALK mutation, more than 50% of them have dramatic shrinkage of the cancers from an ALK inhibitor, which has very little side effects because it's not a chemotherapy. So patients who went on this ALK trial who had ALK mutations had a much better result than patients who had traditional chemotherapy.
So a lot of the clinical trials that we do, specifically as it relates to, say, treatment of active cancer, is because we either don't have a good treatment, or we have a treatment but it does not prolong life significantly or cure the cancer, or that it's too toxic and we need to have a replacement for it. So if we are to improve outcome again and cure ultimately, which is what our objective is, we have to be able to test these new treatments.
We often see in our cancer center patients who are treated in the community and are being told there are no more options. And for them, we usually will have a clinical trial in which they may see benefit when there are no other options.
Probably one of the most beautiful examples to bring about is a drug called Gleevec. And Gleevec was tested in 2 settings where there's really no good treatment, GIST and CML. And now we actually have patients who have responded so well and are living significantly longer.
So I think what's very important is for the patients to understand both the risks and benefits of clinical trials.
I do think that clinical trials provide the hope, because after all, some of these new cures that we have found actually came in from a serendipitous finding from an early clinical trial.
Clinical trials may increase your options and offer access to new treatments before they're widely available. Of course, your treatment decision should always be based on what's best for you. But since participation in clinical trials means finding better treatments, and since those of us who experience cancer stand to gain the most from better treatments, it seems to me that if more of us partnered with doctors and participated in clinical trials, we could help drive progress forward faster.